First, it's been a very difficult couple of weeks in our system as we lost one of our students, Miles Jennis. As we take a moment of silence, I'd ask you to keep Miles and his family and all of his friends in your thoughts and your prayers. And so now we'll have a moment of silence. And now the members will rise to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First, do we have any revisions to the agenda? Okay, so our first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. We have minutes from, let's see, I think this is our board work session. Our board work session on October 5. We also have minutes from the regular meeting on September 11, and a work session from November or September 25. Are there any revisions to the minutes? So they'll be approved as presented. The next up is our spotlight, which is Glenwood Elementary School.
Good evening, Chairman Jones, board members, and Superintendent Dr. Duty. I have the privilege this evening to introduce Dr. Christy Beam, our principal at Glenwood Elementary. This is her first full year at Glenwood and has just done an amazing job jumping in, really getting to build strong relationships with her staff and students and family members. She's got some really great information to share with you about how she has been using some of the district initiatives to improve her students' results and help ensure she's preventing the achievement gap before it can even get started. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Beam.
Hello, thank you for having us. Oh, okay, we'll figure this out. Okay, there he goes. Okay. I'm Dr. Christy Beam, and I'm the principal at Glenwood. And I'm here with our Rti Co-Coordinators, Ms. Amelia Kopp and Ms. Ann Guilfoyle. And we want to tell you some of the great things that are happening at Glenwood. At Glenwood, we approached this year with a theme of looking back and moving forward. And what we mean by that is that we're examining our foundational pieces to ensure that we are implementing our programs with fidelity and that we are training, monitoring, and supporting for high expectations and high results for all of our students. We want to ensure that through our programs, our instruction, and our supports in the framework of EL instruction, that we're living our mission statement and our students are measurably achieving exemplary standards in the areas of academics, achievement, and social responsibility. To tie our school improvement plan to district end policies, we started the year with looking at data, setting our vision, and determining the areas of focus to support our teachers and our students so that all students show measurable growth. In general, we have a high-performing student population, and as such, our students need daily, intentional, rigorous learning and ample opportunity for discovery and problem solving in order to show the growth that we're looking for. Of course, we have students that need additional supports. And to determine student need and appropriate interventions, we utilize the multi-tiered systems of support. Our first layer of support is rich, engaging instruction for all students. Through the lens of EL core practices and expeditions, we provide joyful, authentic learning. Using the workshop model, we personalize learning in small groups and individual conferencing. With SEEKS, we foster student engagement. With REAP, our teachers are raving about the learning, new strategies to support strong reading skills amongst our students. Using student protocols, we provide our students a structure to teach effective collaboration. And providing all students instruction in creative and critical thinking, we foster high-level thinking for all. We monitor these programs through for consistency, and we monitor them through walkthroughs, checklists, collaborative planning, doing model lessons, and coaching. For the students that have already mastered grade level standards of excellence, we offer enrichment through the LINKS program and other forms of differentiation. However, we also have students that do need additional support to meet those standards. And for those students, we're really proud of the work that Ms. Kopp and Ms. Guilfoyle have initiated this year to identify the needs early, to give our students the best chance of future success, and they're going to tell us a little more about that.
As RTI coordinators, we need information that will help us determine who needs support, what level of support they need, and if our support is working. In other words, is the student on track to meet grade level benchmarks? So we are always trying to perfect the ways that we screen and test our students in reading. This slide shows what research demonstrates happens to student readers over time. The struggling readers start to separate from the strong readers very early on and do not catch up. But notice what is happening in first grade. There is not much difference among the students. This is where we first have to identify who is going to struggle going forward and intervene to give them what they need to keep this gap from forming.
One of the screener options that CSD gave us to use is Dibbles Next, which is a free online assessment system. We decided to take it a step further and purchase Dibbles benchmark and progress monitoring materials, administration manuals, and a subscription to a web-based data system that tracks student scores and generates reports for us. We also attended a 2 full-day training in how to administer and score the test effectively. We were able to do all this thanks to grants from the Glenwood PTA and the Decatur Education Foundation. Okay, here is an example of a first grade class's fall benchmark scores that we can access from the online data system. Scores in red indicate the need for intensive support. And scores in yellow indicate the need for strategic support. We then meet to determine which research-based interventions to use. And the examples are included are direct, explicit instruction and phonological awareness, systematic, sequential, and multisensory phonics instruction, and Read Live.
So our focus on early detection is designed to prevent that achievement gap from ever occurring. We'll be evaluating the effectiveness of our monitoring tool and our interventions, and we'll be looking to CSD for guidance and funding in the coming years. By providing appropriate supports for all of our students, we create classrooms where students are engaged and invested in their own learning, and we're setting them on their path for greatness. So thank you.
Thank you.
For those who aren't aware or familiar with it, can you just share briefly about Read Live?
Okay, so Read Live is an intervention that's computer-based, and it focuses on the intervention of repeated reads. It's highly engaging. It's all nonfiction text. Kids love to read it. I actually enjoy reading the text, and I learn facts along with the students. So it's great because we have a lot of kids who I think are actually more excited about reading from doing Read Live. Anne, did you want to add anything?
Sure. You start out by giving the students a leveling test so that they know what level to start at, and it gives them, if they're at a lower level, it gives them phonics practice. So they're working on words that have similar phonetic patterns, and they're tested on their fluency in reading those word lists as a beginning score, and then they're tested on a story as a beginning score, and then they practice both the word lists and the story, and then they have another test at the end. And we set the goal of this fluency, the speed for them. And once they pass that, they go to the next story at that level. And once they pass the level, they go to the next level.
So also, so I could go on and on about Read Live, and actually I did at Community Circle a few weeks ago, and I was able to get a whole bunch of volunteers because I had such a passionate speech. But it's great because we have some volunteers who've come in each for an hour training with me prior to working with children, but then they're shadowing us. But what I wanted to tell you is I'm also excited about Read Live because it has several comprehension check-ins. So that includes fill in the blank. So we're also looking at fluency, which is usually an indicator for if the child's comprehending. So if they're able to read fluently, then they're able to focus on actually comprehending and thinking about what they're reading. And then it has fill in the blank questions, and then also a retell component. And so through all of those different check-ins, we're actually able to really see, is the student able to comprehend the text, which is ultimately what we want students to do as good readers.
Thank you.
Yeah, any questions? No? Thank you. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is the public comment period. We have 8. So we have 8 people who signed up for public comment. We'll do 3 minutes apiece. And the first on the list is Neil Norton.
Good evening. I'm Neil Norton. I live at 135 Mount Vernon Drive. And I have 2 girls in the high school. I've been at Claremont, Renfro, Glenwood. And I just wanted to say, you might be familiar with the term unconsciously incompetent and consciously incompetent. So unconsciously incompetent is when you don't even know a problem exists, and consciously incompetent is when you become aware of it. And I have to say I've recently become consciously incompetent, but please pay attention to the incompetent part when it comes to race relations in the City Schools of Decatur. And, you know, I'm a white male, and that's something I wasn't even really to be able to talk about, and that privilege that's associated with that. But there is privilege, and I appreciate all the data and heuristics that the board looks at, but there's some things that you just can't put a finger on, but it exists. And I've become conscious of that recently, and it's important to me to speak out about it and lift, because everybody's busy, especially if you've been at the other end of that incompetence, and you still have time to come here and talk about it and run it. So I just want to support the Beacon Hills community's requests. I think they're very important. And if nothing else, it just puts attention on something that maybe we're not giving enough attention to, and listen to that community, what they have to say to us, because just the fact that they're putting that forward for us is our opportunity, and we can be better for that. And I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Next is Jamaria Durden.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the name.
Jamaria Durden. Did I get it right? Yes.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Jamelia Durden, and I'm a part of Black Student Union. I'm here today to lay open one of my experiences of racial discrimination in the school. Last year, I had a teacher that started off nice and reasonable, but sad to say that didn't last. I and the other Black students later got treated differently from the white students in my class. It was things like getting ignored when asking a simple question or receiving an attitude when you needed help with the content. But then the Black students started to get singled out and having the teacher only come with us with the hard problems, even when I insisted I knew the material and it showed in my grade. But I was still accused of not knowing the material, not trying hard enough, no matter how high my grade was. During a presentation, I was personally humiliated by the teacher, and I had to call my mom up to the school. That was my breaking point. This may not seem like a big deal to most, but it's not a good feeling when you come into class thinking you're a bother and your own teacher dismisses your needs as a student and as a person. Or think that we are less or incapable to do high-level work that other students are doing because people do not see past the stereotypes pinned against my skin color. Members of the board, I appreciate what you and the school administration has done for us, but there's still room for change. I'm tired of only being taken seriously when being punished but not understood or supported when we experience anxiety, stress, or depression. We need you guys to help. We need you guys to help us and work with us, and I promise we'll work with you. We are tired of only being a face of diversity. It is sad enough that we have to ask for what should already be given. Thank you for allowing my voice to be heard.
See, Suleiman Rashid.
Good afternoon. My name is Suleiman Rashid. Thank you for pronouncing that correctly. I'm a senior at Decatur High School, and I also wanted to come up and share a discriminatory event that happened to me actually 2 years ago, my sophomore year of high school. So I was in ROTC, junior ROTC, or Reserve Officer Military Training Corps, and I was on the drill team, and we were going to a drill meet, and I'm pretty sure there were only 2 African Americans on the bus, and everyone else was white. And I was a sergeant at the time, so I was sitting in the back with the rest of the NCOs and the rest of the officers. And so I had fallen. It was dark. It was in the morning. It was around 6 a.m. in the morning. And so I ended up waking up, and I heard some stuff being talked, some people talking. So I just kind of listened in. And then I realized that one of my closest friend at the time was making profoundly racist jokes about obviously black people to the rest of his friends. Sorry. And it hurt. I ended up leaving ROTC after that because I felt that I wasn't respected. And that wasn't the only, it was the first time that I'd ever heard someone say things like that. But I realized that, because I feel like a lot of times it's easy just to say that, racism is over, it doesn't exist anymore. And, it's not true. And while this might not, affect, the teachers and the instructional staff, it's still being taught. And whether it's implicit or unconscious, it's still there, and it still hurts. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
Daxton Pettis.
Hello, my name is Daxton Pettis. I'm a sophomore and Black Student Union historian. As an African American student indicator, some teachers have viewed me different because of that. Similar to the previous speaker, teachers didn't look past my stereotypes. Luckily, recently I haven't had that many issues with it, but when I was younger, around 4th through 7th grade, teachers have shown bias against me or not shown me attention being an African American student. The biggest stereotype that they can't look past is that all African Americans are bad, and they viewed me, or they marked me as a bad student when I was younger. And it was difficult because it felt uncomfortable when teachers purposely avoided to answer my questions or talk to me, or they just didn't listen to me when I asked my questions. But I think that really could be training. They assume based on their previous experiences or the stereotypes that all African Americans are like this. While they don't purposely do this, I know that somewhere in their head it has been taught or has been said that most African American students are like this. Multiple students have been, I'll say, marked, and then this affects them later on in their learning progress. Thank you.
Lilia Ramirez.
Hello. I wanted to speak on behalf, as a parent of children of color. I have 4 children. Hearing these other students' stories, as difficult as it is to hear, for me as a parent, I've heard those stories in the backseat of my car, coming, at dinner time, and it is so disheartening. So today I would like to share a story from my son who graduated last year, because we only have a few minutes and I could go on for days. We moved here when my son was in 7th grade, in the middle of his 7th grade year. He, incredibly smart kid, advanced in all his classes. He started 8th grade, and there was a long-term sub brought into the classroom. My son's name is Jose. At this point, the first week of the sub being in the classroom, the sub continuously called him Jorge. Continuously called him Jorge second week, the third week. Enough so that the other students would even correct the teacher and say, no, his name is Jose, not Jorge. My son, after all of this happened, when the regular teacher came back, told me how relieved he was that the regular teacher was back. I had no idea this had been happening for about a month. And I said, why? And he explained it to me. And I said, well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you tell me? Why couldn't you report it? And what he said was, no one's gonna do anything. And what I'm hearing here, and what I heard in my house, is that there's a culture in City Schools of Decatur where people don't feel safe, comfortable, or even heard reporting. And that's the problem, because there's no reason any of these children should be feeling this way. They feel this way. My son, being a man of color, feels this way every time he leaves the house. When he's coming home late at night, I'm the mom who says, whatever you do, don't run home, because I don't want a cop car to pull you over and ask you what you're doing, running in our neighborhood at night. I'm the mom who says, make sure that if you are messing around doing something stupid, look around and notice that if you're the only kid of color there, you're gonna be the one to get blamed for this. Because that's the reality they face every single day. School should be the one place that should be an equalizer. It should be the one place where what they do, who they are as people, should be looked up beyond their skin color or beyond any sort of prejudices the teachers, administrators, or other students may have. I only have 16 seconds, and I could tell you many more stories like this just in my family, in my 4 kids' experiences. So please consider the fact that this is the culture that is being exposed in City Schools of Decatur. Thank you.
Darius Thompson.
Good evening, how are you doing? My name is Darius Thompson. I would first like to start off with the Black Student Union, the benefits that it has on our school, and how, as a learning connection that we have, how students come together collectively and address our situations, and without being labeled as, to be loud and expressive about the situations that we have. We talk amongst ourselves in ways that we can address the situations, how we can handle the situations. And first, I would want to address that. But secondly, I wanted to address the situation that I had last year in a math class. So a teacher, she was a very introverted teacher. She was very quiet, hard to learn because she wasn't as open, and very hard to learn because of her quietness. And so she left just about before Christmas break, and we still had a assistant teacher in the classroom, and she wasn't much help at all. She barely understood the work that we were learning. After that, we had a long-term sub, and it was hard learning different teaching styles of different teachers, all the teachers that we had through the year. And my grievances that I had with that teacher was when I got so upset that I was like, I could not understand this work. I'm getting things wrong that I was never taught. And what is your makeup policy? Because every teacher has one. To the fact that they got mad about me being, emailing them, talking to them about my situation. I went to the assistant principals, nothing happened. I went to the head of the math department, nothing happened. I guess they got mad about me doing that they started to call me dumb in front of the classroom. They expressed my grade in front of the classroom, told me that I was stupid when I asked a question in class that they thought I should know. All the classrooms had smart boards, so when it was time to present what the class test scores were, do you want to know your test grade? They would intentionally put my grade on the Promethean board and express to the classroom, which was predominantly white, that Darius had an F on his last test. So that I want to address. Thank you.
Philip Cuffey.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here as a resident. I live at 408 Adams Street in the city of Decatur. And we've been here for 3 years. My children graduated from the high school, and they've done very well for the most part. But I'm here as a concerned parent and as a person who lives in the community. I want to make sure that the children who are coming up behind my children have the best opportunity for achievement, best opportunity for success, and the best opportunity for fairness and equity. So I've come here with a commitment to the children in this community and fellow neighbors, that I will put forth my best effort to make sure that the children have the best experience so they can be productive adults in our community. Thank you for your time.
Claire Scheck-Snyder.
Evening. My name's Claire Scheck-Snyder, and I live at 116. I broke it. I'll buy it. At 116 Drexel Avenue, Decatur, and I have a freshman at Decatur High School. And I just wanted to stand up. I didn't take my opportunity to do it the last time that we were at the school board, and I regretted it, to stand up and say that I completely support Beacon Hill's efforts and their petition that they submitted in for action in 30 days. I think that they've, it's been a long time, and I welcome and invite your action. It's time. My child comes home and tells stories about things that go on in school at Renfro and in the high school, and there's definitely things going on in our classrooms today. I think that we've made huge leaps and bounds in a lot of ways, but in that we're protecting some, but maybe not all, and we need to do a better job. Our community is amazing. I'm so proud to live here, and I want to make sure that we protect each and every child, no matter what color, what gender identity they are, and what age, that we can do that, and we can do a really good job at it, and we can lead the country in doing a good job on all of these things because we're a tight-knit community and a really smart, powerful, caring group of people. So I encourage you all to do that and to act as Beacon Hill would like you to. I think it's time. Thank you.
That's it for public comment. And next on the agenda is the superintendent's comment.
I want to thank all the students, especially for coming out tonight and sharing your stories. I'll be following up with some of you because I need some more details, but thank you so much for coming out. I know that could be really difficult to do that especially in an environment like this. So good job. Thank you. I want to share a couple things. One, we had a good follow-up meeting with some representatives from the Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights shortly after the last board meeting. And we have a second meeting, I think it's tomorrow, is that correct? So I think we all recognize that it's not something you solve with one meeting or two meetings or three meetings, but it's that ongoing dialogue, and I know that we're looking forward to the meeting tomorrow and continuing that dialogue. So thank you all for being willing to come out and do that, and we look forward to meeting with you tomorrow. I just want to give a quick shout out to our Winona Park staff. As Lewis shared earlier, we lost a kindergartner at Winona Park, and that is a tremendously difficult thing to deal with when something like that happens. And not surprisingly, our staff at Winona Park, as they would be at all of our schools, were absolutely amazing. The way they all came together and supported each other and supported the family. And of course, the parents came in. And like Claire was saying, it's a tight-knit community, right? People come together and in so many ways and to support folks. And these folks hadn't even been part of the city schools of Decatur for very long. And people still stepped up. And to know that we, in a time of need, we had one of our teachers at a hospital all night supporting a parent because the parent was alone, it just speaks volumes to the kind of staff that we have and the kind of culture we want to continue to cultivate. So a huge shout out to Winona Park, to their staff, to their parents. That whole community has been dealing with a lot. And it's just amazing how well everyone came together. And I know that that family will continue to be supported for a long, long time to come as they work through all of this. So many thanks to all of them for that. My other comments I'll share with the items as they come up.
So for the chair's report, I don't have much. I'd echo Dr. Duty's thanks to all those who spoke during the public comment. I think this is a model of how you can help us understand these issues. Very effective comments that actually help me understand things that I am trying to learn, right, but that I don't necessarily already get. I'm in the process of becoming, consciously unaware or competent or incompetent. In any event, it's a learning process, and I appreciate y'all sharing it with us and helping us through it because, it's working, right? We're working hard, but you're helping us to be aware of the issues, and you're doing it very effectively. So thank you for that. We also have some congratulations to hand out. We have 6 Decatur High School students who are named semifinalists in the 2019 National Merit Scholarship Competition. I guess I don't have their names, but that's a very high honor. It's a prestigious award, And it's the result of a lot of hard work. The next step is the competition to become a finalist. If 6 are semifinalists, I mean, very few wind up being selected as a finalist because this is a very prestigious national award, but that's a great accomplishment for the DHS staff and for these 6 students. Jason Jones, an 8th grader at Renfro, has been selected to serve on the 2018-2019 State Superintendent's Student Advisory Council. This is a great honor and extremely cool, I think. Jason was one of 120 students chosen from over 1,000 applicants. And he will, as a member of the council, meet with the State Superintendent Woods to discuss the impact of state policies in the classroom. So they will discuss issues related to education, serve as the superintendent's ambassadors to their respective schools, and participate in service projects to benefit schools and students. So, thank you to Jason Jones for agreeing to be our ambassador, and congratulations, because I really think that is a great honor and a great experience. The last is that our fave teachers, 2 of our teachers, Allison Eber and Matt Livermore, have been selected to present at the Georgia Educational Technology Conference in November. And again, this is a process in which their presentation was selected out of over 700 submissions. And so this is a great honor. They will be preparing a 50-minute presentation entitled Leveraging Google Apps to Strengthen Executive Functioning Skills. It's a great job. We're proud of you and appreciate all of that hard work. That's my report. I think the next item on our agenda.
Sorry, can I add something?
Sure.
I know I'm speaking a little bit out of turn, but
Yeah.
since it's sort of chair's comments, I just wanted to, and I'm not the chair, but I'm just echoing a couple of things. I just want to, I know it's been said, but I really want to let the students know that I appreciate your bravery in coming and speaking out tonight, especially Jamaria Durden, Suleiman Rashid, Daxton Pettis, and Darius Thompson. And Miss Durden, where did she go? She left already. Well, she said, and I wrote it down, this may not seem like a big deal to most. And I just want her to know, if you can relay the message to her, if she has any friends still in the room, like, it is a big deal, and it's a big deal to the board too. And so I don't want anyone in the room or in our community to feel like this isn't a big deal, because it is a big deal. And Malia Ramirez, you made the comment about, to your son, why didn't you tell me? And because your son thought nobody would do anything about it. I hope that everybody in this room hears the message loud and clear that we want to know about these things as they happen so that we can address it when they happen, because it's so hard to go back and fix these things years later when you're hearing about them for the first time. And so I hope that the students in the room will hear this, and the parents in the room will tell their children to speak up when things happen. Come to the board meetings. The board members' contact information is on the board. Our cell phone numbers and email addresses are, on the website. Reach out to us and let us know when these things are happening. And I want you all to know, too, that I appreciate your voices and your advocacy. And we are on the same side. There's sort of the optics that we're not on the same side. At least I feel that way. Maybe it's because we're sort of sitting on this side of the room and you're sitting on that side of the room. And it kind of creates this perception that we're not aligned, or that you have to convince us that there's a problem. And I just want you all to know that the board knows there's a problem. We don't need to be convinced of that. We are on your side, and we're supporting you, and we're trying to figure out the best way to handle it. But this is issue number 1 and priority number 1 on the board's agenda. We continue to put our money where our mouth is on that by hiring a full-time executive director, engaging in beyond diversity training for all of our staff members, inserting additional layers of review for disciplinary issues as they work their way through the system, so that we can make sure that as disciplinary issues arise, that they're being handled with equity. And we're also taking a much deeper dive into our instructional practices to make sure that the very things that some of you students spoke about tonight don't continue to happen in the future. And the board is very much committed to making a transformational change in this regard. And we had a board retreat about 5 weeks ago on this very issue. And this is where sometimes I feel like we don't do a very good job, and that's why I'm taking a little bit of liberty here and apologize, but of making sure that our community knows what we're doing, because tonight we have a room full of people, but when we had this all-day retreat 5 weeks ago, nobody else was there, and so you don't know that we met with a consultant to talk about what transformational change is and what's going to be required and why this is different and why this is a much tougher nut to crack and how we're going to get there. And one of the things that we talked about at the retreat was that when you make these types of transformational changes, which is the type of change that's going to be required to address an issue that is this serious, you oftentimes have to take this leap of faith and you don't know where or how you're going to land. And so you're sort of taking this leap of faith and you're in the middle of the air and you're mapping your coordinates kind of in the middle of the air. And that's kind of where we are right now, where I think the board has taken this leap. We are committed to making changes. We don't know exactly what all the changes are that need to be made and how we're going to get there, and we're working our way through this process in the middle of the air. And part of what we have to do is to work closely with you guys and to continue with everybody in our community so that we're hearing what the issues are, addressing them as they come up. And sometimes we're going to take swings and misses. I mean, and that's happened already. There's some times where we're going to put a plan in place and think that it's going to address at least a portion of the problem, and sometimes it might not, and we've got to go back to square one. This is such a deeply rooted, big problem to solve that it can't be solved in 30 days. It's not to say certain initiatives can't be put in place in 30 days, but it's going to take some time, a really long time, I think, to achieve what needs to be achieved in order to address the problem. And it's never going to happen fast enough, and we're going to try to push it as fast as we can, but we want to be intentional about making sure that we're doing things that are going to have an impactful, lasting, meaningful difference on our students and in our community. And so I just wanted to say that so that you guys and everybody in this room understands that we are on your side. We identify and understand that this is a very big issue, and we are working with you and want to continue conversations about how we can continue to address this problem. So that's it for me.
Thank you.
And sorry, one other thing, sorry. Since I have the microphone. I know, Dr. Duty, you thanked Winona Park's staff about Miles Jennis and the work that they did and support that they gave to the family that was in need, but you and your staff did that as well, and it was a team effort, and it's noble of you to just recognize them, but I wanted to recognize you and your staff because we were on the receiving end of text messages and emails about all the plans and supports that were going to be put in place, and it wasn't just them, it was a true team effort that was guided by your leadership, so thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I just want to echo the rest of my board in thanking everyone that came to speak today, but specifically the kids. I know that wasn't easy. And as hard as it was for me to hear it, I know it was harder for you to speak your truth. And part of the reason is because you have to trust that who you're talking to is going to first hear you, and then we're going to take what you told us and we're going to do something about it. That takes trust. And so I just want to tell you that you can trust me with your experiences, the good ones and the not so good ones. And as long as I'm sitting in this seat, it every day and every month, it is my goal to make those stories that I heard today become less and less and less. I can promise you that that is my goal. So again, I thank everybody for coming here. I hate that you have to come here and tell these stories, but we have to hear the stories. And eventually, I want you guys to keep coming, and then stories will change, and you will start to tell us about the 4 years you had in high school or the 2 years you had at FAVE and what amazing experiences you had and the experiences that our white students have, you will have the same. You will be able to leave Decatur High School and have the same great experiences as I know a lot of other students are able to have here. So because I know we have students that have great experiences, I know it's possible for you all to have great experiences as well. And I know myself and the board up here is determined to make that a priority and continue for that to be a priority. Even when it starts to get harder or tougher, the priority won't change, and I can promise you that. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you. Thanks, Tasha, and thanks, Annie. I think they said it very well. I want to reiterate how important it is to have students come and speak to us. This is a joint effort with the entire community, and we need you, and we want to keep hearing from you. And I think hearing from students is the most true measure of whether or not we are being successful. So thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your stories. Don't stop coming. We want to see you. We want to keep seeing you here, and we hope that you will speak with your student colleagues at the school, because it sounds like also there's a culture, a student culture that we need to work on changing. So it's a teaching, at the teacher level, and it's also at the student level. And great work with what you are already doing, but let us know how we can help to empower you, because I think that that's going to be a very powerful component of what we do as well. So thank you.
I just want to thank you all for showing up, because every time you show up, you keep it front and center. And I want to emphasize that we are your board, and you are our parents, and you are our students, and we serve you. So help us. We may not always be, we're in, some of us with our blinders, our unconscious incompetency, are imperfect allies, but we're working to become better allies. So I appreciate you showing up and continuing to share your stories. I see a couple people who didn't share their stories. Trajan, good to see you. Thank you so much for showing up. Please keep coming.
That's a good segue into strategic priorities.
It is. So the retreat that Ms. Keola was talking about, one of the things we decided there is that we've, part of our best intentions of making this strategic priority item and talking about equity was putting it front and center. But the unintentional impact that has had is that it makes it seem like it's a standalone thing. And equity is not a standalone thing. And so one of the changes we decided to make is, rather than having a standalone equity item, equity should be a part of everything that we do. And so what you will see starting with this agenda is every consent item, report, action item has an equity component. And so part of what the team that puts these agendas together is tasked with is thinking about, how does this individual item on the board agenda impact equity? And describe it. And so you will be seeing that change as we move forward with our agendas, trying to make sure that we keep that focus on equity in everything that we do. So I just wanted to share that, because that will be a change from the practice, and make sure people understand what the intent is behind that change. So I'm glad to see it. I think it's something we'll get better at. We talk about equity all the time. Documenting where equity comes into play with different items is new in terms of actually putting it on the agenda. So we will get better as time passes, but I wanted to make sure you all understood that change. That's all we have for that.
Any further discussion? Okay. Next on our agenda are the consent items. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Forgot to wait for that. So there's 6 items: the personnel report, the school nutrition report, financial reports, the Decatur High School international field trips, for September 2019. The casework for the upper elementary at Tally Street, and the program evaluation service contract. Do we have, I guess we've got a motion. Is there, I thought somebody wanted to pull one of these.
All the questions that I asked pertaining to these issues have been answered. The only thing I would probably say is that the high school field trips and the equity goal of reserving a single scholarship for each trip is something we may want to discuss as how we expand that in the future, but I don't think that's pertinent to a vote on the issue as it stands.
Okay. Any further discussion, or we just take the vote? All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, chair votes aye, so the consent items are all unanimously passed. Okay, next on the agenda are two informational reports. The first is the Student Achievement Report, and the second naming facilities. But Ms. Watley?
So you'll find in the packet and attached to the agenda is a full achievement report with some 60 or so slides. We didn't think you'd want to talk about every single one of those 60 slides. So we picked out a handful of them, and Ms. Wadley is going to walk through those. But we are happy to answer questions or comments or review any of the slides in the presentation. But we thought for purposes of expediency, we would kind of focus on some of the bigger picture things and then jump into specific things as needed. So Heidi, you want to take it away?
Good evening, board members and Dr. Duty. As Dr. Duty said, I'm going to skip around a little bit, and you guys have a marked version that have little Post-it notes on the slides that we're going to visit, so that maybe will help you. And we will start, and I do have a shorter presentation with these slides and then a longer one, so if you have a question about a slide we're not talking about, we can talk about it afterwards, if that is okay.
It's because Claire broke it.
She broke it. she may she may really have broken it. Is it? Okay. Just, okay. I've got it. So as Dr. Duty talked about, we're weaving equity into everything. And so taking a close look at student achievement enables us to work towards our goal of closing the achievement gaps. So in this data, we will examine academic levels and proficiency and growth in all student subgroups and gaps of performance between subgroups. Knowing a student subgroup's membership's race, gender, socioeconomic status will indicate nothing about how they are likely to achieve academically is our ultimate goal. So some of this data we're looking in excruciating detail so we can know what we're working with and what we need to do. This report will use a lot of acronyms. This slide can be a guide to help you translate through some of those acronyms. This report in its entirety looks at the Georgia milestones, the end of grade, the end of course, some of our achievement gaps on GMAS, measures of academic progress, advanced placement, international baccalaureate, and our graduation rate. So you can see some of the acronyms in practice already. It connects to our ends policy, and this little chart that we made lists the ends and also what the data sources that might help us monitor whether or not we're meeting those ends. The description just has some keywords, not the whole end, but you can kind of go back and look where some of this information might fit in. So this data, we're going to look at it in from a lot of different views. We'll start with the big picture, look at global data from miles away, then we'll get closer and closer. As we're looking at each slide, know that there will be more detail coming or in other slides. So now you're going to skip to slide 8, and we're going to look at some of our points of pride. CSD exceeds the state in all areas on the end of grade test. For the milestones, we have the highest percentage proficient of third grade English language arts. CSD fourth grade is second highest in the state. 72% of third grade reading is at or above grade level. 93% of eighth graders were reading at or above grade level. This improved in this cohort from the sixth grade, which is really impressive to see an improvement from middle school, from sixth grade to eighth grade. The percent proficient has increased in third grade mathematics and eighth grade science. End of course tests, we exceed the state in ninth grade literature, American literature, algebra, economics, US history, and biology. For both literature tests, we are, the American literature and the ninth grade literature, we're third highest district in the state. Our graduation rate is the 26th highest individual school in the state. Some areas for improvement. The achievement gap persists in all areas on the end of grade test and on the end of course test. We need to increase the rate that's our percentage of students that are proficient and distinguished is growing in order to close those gaps. In mathematics, we're seeing some decline in how many students are proficient and distinguished. And there's a pretty significant difference in geometry, particularly between our winter and our spring administrations. And that's something we can talk more about later. You're going to skip to slide 11. And you will see here, this looks at the average of all the content areas. You can look at English language arts and see the top row represents 2016 with 72% of the students proficient and distinguished. 2017 is red with 69%. 2018 is orange with 69%. You can see that we have some slight decreases, slight increases, but that's the pattern of the whole content area across all grades 3 through 8. If you skip to slide 13, you can see each individual grade. And you can see we have some nice increases in the third grade, and other grades have varying performances of increasing and decreasing. There are increases in grades 3, 4, and 8. On the next slide, it's the same information, but we're also looking at how it compares to the state and to the Metro RISA. Where you see the blue, those are values that exceed both the state and the RISA.
Excuse me, what is RISA, please?
RISA is the Regional Education Service Agency. And so ours is Metro, so it includes all the counties that would consider metro area.
Thank you.
And so ideally, when we look at this, we want to see blue all the way across the whole thing. We want to be higher, and we want to be growing more and declining less. If you look at third grade, we have the most of that in this area. When you look at fifth grade, you can see that the percent proficient was 78% in 2016, 69% in 2017 and 18. So this represents a decline of 9 percentage points. So the state is staying the same, and we are decreasing a little bit there. And even though we're much higher than the state, we still don't want to be decreasing. If you move to slide 16, this slide shows reading status. And on this graph, it shows the percentage of students reading at or above grade level, and we also have the state of Georgia. So if you look at the lighter colors, that's the state of Georgia, 16, 17, 18. If you look at the darker colors, that's CSD. And if you look at eighth grade, you can really see that we have a very different pattern than the state. Where the state is declining, we are increasing. And that particular group of eighth graders, if you look back at the red bar when they were seventh graders and at the blue bar when they were sixth graders, you can see that they have continued to increase. And that's what I was talking about earlier, which is something nice to see at the middle school level. Just for information, across all grades, 87% of CSD students are reading at or above grade level compared to 67% in the state. You can skip now to slide 18, and we'll look at mathematics. And this again shows across the grade levels. You can see we have some nice increases in third grade, and fourth grade has stayed the same. But fifth grade through eighth grade, we see some decreases over the years. And then the next page shows again that same pattern. You can see third grade, we have the blue straight across where we're exceeding the state in the RISA. But in the fourth and fifth grade, we are exceeding in terms of our performance, but not in terms of our growth. And then when we look at the next slide, we see 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And it is of concern that we have a decline in the percentage proficient. We're still greater than the state, but we're, when you look overall at our mathematics, that's why it's an area for improvement, is that we're not growing in the way that we would like to grow. Next, you can flip to slide 28, and this is our end of course results. So those are all of the end of course tests, and you can look to see across the areas. We have some really nice increases, particularly in biology and economics. Our literature areas have been growing and continuing to grow. When you look at the geometry, that's the combined performance of both the winter and the spring. When you break them apart, it's very different look. The next slide is slide 31. And this slide, you can see English. These are the unmatched cohorts. So if you look at the bottom row, the class of 2022 are current 8th graders, and you can see their performance in language arts when they were 5th graders, when they were 6th graders, when they were 7th graders, when they were 8th graders, and then when you go to green, it's their performance in mathematics. And so in this group, you can see that there's some pretty significant declines from 16 to 17, and part of the reason for that is that this was the first year last year that the students who were taking advanced classes didn't also have to take the end of course test. So if you were accelerated in math and you were taking algebra in the 8th grade, you didn't take the 8th grade test. So all of our highest students were pulled out of that cohort. And that's the same kind of thing we see with our geometry scores when we pull those apart and looking at the end of grade. Our kids in the winter are our kids who are taking it compacted and they're finishing geometry in the winter. And so those students are performing at a much higher level than the other students. And it actually looks about the same as how these 8th graders are doing. So the next slide is slide 34. And this shows our ranking in the state. When you look at all the districts together, the yellow is where we are in the top 10. And so in most areas, we're in the top 10. In all areas, we're in the top 20. The one, it's just interesting to look at that. So globally, from a far distance, things are looking pretty good. When you go to slide 37 and you take a look at our performance across grade levels, across different subgroups, what you can see here is in red is our black subgroup, in green is our white subgroup, and in purple are all the other subgroups combined. And so what you can see is we have a significant achievement gap across all areas. The least percent proficient is for our black students is in the 5th grade, social studies and math. The percentage of black students ranges from, in each of these cohorts, ranges from 16% to 23% of the cohort, so from 80 students to 106 students. So that's some pretty sobering data in terms of where we need to focus on our achievement. The next slide looks at when you pull out economic disadvantage. So for the students who are economically disadvantaged, on the left side we have the students who are black and economically advantaged and not economically advantaged. And then on the other side is all other groups. So that's everybody when you take out the black students. And when you go back and look at the other graph, you could see that all other groups were performing very similar to the white subgroup. So that's why I mixed them all together to look at. And I think I jotted on your copy the percentage of the red, which is the beginning learner. And you can see in both groups, there is an achievement gap between non-economically disadvantaged students, Black and all other groups, as well as economically disadvantaged. The next slide shows just another view of this data. And you're looking at the end of course? No, this is still the end of grade, and this is just, it's broken down by grade level. So on the left side is grades 3 through 7, and then grade 8 is on the right side. And the top graphs are the Black students, and the bottom graph is the white students. So that shows sort of the overall achievement gap that is existing across grade levels and content areas. And then finally, our graduation rate is 95.41. It is good news that our Black and white graduation rate is equally high. Economic disadvantaged students are graduating at 90%, which is a little bit lower than the overall, but still a very good graduation rate, and students with disabilities at 93.3. Do you all have any questions about these slides or any of the other ones?
Can you go back a couple slides to the first economically disadvantaged slide?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that one. So one of the things I want to point out, you may remember we talk as part of Courageous Conversations about isolate race. And it's the meaning behind it is it's not that you only talk about race and nothing else, but it's when you are going to look at something, make sure you're also looking at race and make a concerted effort to do that. And I think this slide is a good example of that, because a lot of times what you hear is people say this isn't about race, it's about socioeconomic status. And so what you see here is it's about both, okay? So just to make sure it's really clear, when you go from top to bottom, so if you go from the top left to the bottom left, those are Black students. The top are economically disadvantaged. The bottoms are not economically disadvantaged. And you can see the students in the group on the bottom there do better, okay? So economic disadvantage does have an impact within that subgroup. And if you look on the right side, you can see that the group on the top, which are economically disadvantaged students, and the group on the bottom, which are not, the group on the bottom does better. So yes, socioeconomic status does have an impact. But then you also can go from left to right. And so if you go to the left on the top, you have the Black students who are economically disadvantaged, and on the right you have all the other students, and you can see that the group on the left is performing lower than the group on the right. And if you go to the bottom row, if you have the Black non-economically disadvantaged students on the left, and all the other students that are non-economically disadvantaged on the right, the students on the right are doing better, right? And so it's, if somebody says it's not race, it's SES or vice versa, the answer is yes, it's all of those, right? They each have an impact. But what our commitment is, and what we emphasize through Courageous Conversations, is isolate race. So economic disadvantage is a very obvious one. It's really easy to talk about. It's something that can be much more concrete to do things about. It's not about things like implicit bias and things like that are much more difficult cultural things to tackle. So sometimes people revert to talking just about economic disadvantage. And it is an important aspect to talk about, and it is something that will help us eliminate gaps, is by talking about it. But we also will be talking about race in that process. So I just want to use that, because I think that graph right there is a really good example of showing that it's both. There are impacts that our students feel from both of those factors. So just wanted to make sure that we hit on that.
Does anyone have any questions?
Just wanted to say thank you for pulling all of this great data together. We had a lot of questions just because it's a lot of data, but Garrett asked some of those in advance, and I had the opportunity to talk to David in advance. So I don't really have a lot of questions left, but just wanted to say thank you for pulling it together. And I assume that this is going to be something that we can see maybe updated year over year and start to see if we are making progress, and probably, as you pointed out, lend some credibility to some of the milestones that we'll meet through, moving toward our ends. And also just, this will be very helpful as you and your team try to zero in on where are the problems. And we can see now, at different grade levels and also in different subjects where we are having the most trouble. So I think it's going to be very helpful. Thank you.
To that point too, one of the things that will be different in the future is this will be incorporated into our ends monitoring process. And so it's quite possible these data will come to you 3 or 4 times a year. You may recall a lot of districts recognize, as you can see by a 60-slide presentation, and it doesn't even scratch the surface of achievement data, that there's a lot to talk about when you're talking about achievement. And so we'll be looking, when we do that calendar for monitoring of ends, and deciding which ones do we talk about at which point during the school year, so that on an annual basis you are talking about all of those and seeing everything at some point. The other thing we're really working hard on is creating the data analytical tools that allow these data to be live. Like Heidi and I have this vision that in the future, you don't have to pull this report together. You just come and you pull up your computer and you pull up the dashboard and you show the most recent results for whatever it is that you want to look at. And that's the goal we're working towards, so that'll help tremendously. But chances are you probably won't see another report quite like this, where everything is all together in one spot. And believe it or not, there's things that aren't here, right? Like CCRPI was released, but it's embargoed, so we couldn't talk about it. SAT scores were released, but they're embargoed, so we can't talk about them, right? So there's other data too that we look at in our processes, and we'll incorporate that into that ends monitoring process as well. Garrett?
I want to thank you for the comprehensive report. It's really easy to read. Visually, the presentation makes it easy to digest. I want to thank you for the cohort performance. That's something I always ask for, and it's nice to see it there because it allows a different lens and perspective on how to look at things. I want to say that the ELA, I think several times there we were listed as, I know you're not supposed to compare yourself to the Joneses. And in our district, you really don't want to compare yourself to Joneses. But
yeah.
First in the state, I think that's great. And the graduation rate really needs to be recognized. I heard one of our neighboring districts, I won't name, touting their 70-something% graduation rate and how wonderful the strides were that they made to get that. And I'm happy to see that we're up in the clouds with that number. I do have some questions that occurred to me as we were going through the slides just now. I'm sorry for not, I try to get all my questions out ahead of time. On page 16, and I want to appreciate this slide in particular too, you show the reading stats comparing the state of Georgia and the city schools of Decatur and the differences from year to year. And the thing that drew my eye when I saw this in bigger colors is the variation in performance of the state from year to year on these. And if the state is going to jump around by several % per year in any given direction, it makes me wonder how we judge whether we're gaining or losing a point.
I think you do need to be cautious of how you interpret trends.
Right.
They have to be pretty significant swings to say, wow, this is great, or wow, this is a problem, because there is considerable variability there.
And I think if we jump to page 31, this feeds somewhat into the similar question, is can we assume that the state levels, are we at 31?
The unmatched cohort?
Yep.
Is that the one?
Yes, I'm looking at the bottom row. You know, generally what I see there is if you go across the 4 columns, the numbers tend to go up, and occasionally you see these things where they just all of a sudden do something surprising. And I guess given the previous slide, 16, and then looking at this one, I'm left to ask, well, does the whole state drop in 8th grade?
Well, I think it did, because previously, if your accelerated students had to take the end of grade test and the Algebra 1 end of course test.
Are you talking about for the math
Yeah.
scores, right?
For
So
math.
this may be the effect of what happens when you remove the accelerated students from the
Exactly
pool.
what that is.
Yeah, that's exactly
that
what that is. And you see that in the state as well, because last year they made those poor babies take, well, in all previous years, they had to take 2 tests.
Okay, I'm going to park that one because that comes back to the board conversation I'd like to have about the ends goals on this, but not a comment about the report. Slides 57 through 59, where it talks about the percentage of our black students participating in IB. The question I have there is one that I forgot to ask, and I should have, is what is the percentage of our black students at the high school?
It's a little under 30%, I think, right now. So it's fairly close, actually. The enrollment in the IB exam courses is 22.7% black. It's a little under the percent overall, but it's not as far as you might have guessed based on previous conversations. So.
Well, and I also want to say I appreciate these 3 slides because they give us a little bit of a perspective, not on, you know, often when we look at proficiency and distinguished, the flip side of that is, you know, how many students aren't proficient.
Right.
And this one gives us a perspective on how many of our students are performing at some of the highest levels. And so I appreciate that lens that this provides. And with that, I wanted to segue to the board conversation about the ends goals. And I know this came up in my questions that I've asked, but there's that debate that's gone on since Betsy DeVos and Al Franken talked about, you know, proficiency versus growth. And I think, you know, in your presentation, you talked about how we have to have growth to meet the proficiency goals. Maybe the better way for me to do this is kind of like the Mad Lib or the multiple choice thing. Teach to the blank. Do we teach to the test? Do we teach to the end of grade test? Do we teach to the end of course test? Do we teach to the standard? Or do we teach to the student? And so I have some reservations, not if these are not using GMAS in the strategic plan dashboard type of stuff, because very much so you're measuring how well you're delivering the content and the standards and all those things. But to me, if we don't put the student growth first, if we don't put the value added impact first, then we're not, in my mind, we're not keeping the students first and foremost. We're putting the students behind the grade, the course, or whatever. And I think that slide that we just showed, the fact that moving the accelerated math students out of that pool makes us look bad, is one of those implicit things which I don't like looking at those numbers and putting value on those numbers, because I want all of our students to progress, to be met where they're at, taught at their pace, and move forward. And I think when you have state scores that focus on those interim goals, as opposed to the real long-term goal of every student learning every day, I think you end up with situations where systems are implicitly rewarded to keep kids, you know, in the queue so the numbers look good, polishing that diamond, instead of exposing them or allowing them to explore and gain new gems of knowledge. So I have some reservations about how the proficiency stuff misses or doesn't serve well our students who are behind, but maybe making 2 years of progress and being labeled a failure, or our students who are doing great but haven't learned a thing and can continue to be labeled a success. I think we punished some teachers. You know, if you look at the way that school districts tend to be organized, I'm not saying we are, but across the country, some of the least experienced teachers usually end up with the lowest performing by proficiency standards, classes and students. And a growth model rewards the teachers for the value they add no matter where their students started. Whereas the proficiency model can, you know, give accolades to teachers who've done nothing and can punish teachers who have succeeded beyond all measure. So that's a conversation I'd like to have. And I'm very interested in hearing what everybody else has to say on that.
And I would share that to me, it's not an either or, it's a both and.
I completely agree. I think historical bias has been the proficiency model. And that's why I probably come down even heavier on we need to keep it really front and center. We need to really provide that other balance. but I agree.
Thank you for this report. It was packed full of information and presented very well. So thank you very much for that and your time and effort that it was very clear you put into it. So I appreciate that. When I look at the page that isolates race, I think back to the stories that we heard today. So if there's ever a question in someone's mind on why we still see a gap even with students who are not economically disadvantaged, it's because of the stories that we heard today. And when you go to school and don't feel heard or respected, or you feel like you're treated like you're being dumbed down, then every day that kind of attention that you want to put to school, you just lose it and you develop an apathy. And I experienced it myself, and I've seen different moments for my children experiencing it. So it's probably why today has been very emotional for me. But that's where the underlying issue is. And I think the effect of those kind of things we're not paying enough attention to, that it can cause anxiety and depression and apathy. And then we start to see scores like this from students that we know can do better, that their parents know that they can do better, but they don't. And this is the part that we don't talk about. And this is the part you don't see in the data. I mean, there's no way to really to gauge it and to judge it. And so I think I'm very proud and happy of what you and your staff are doing for the discipline part, because if we stop disciplining our kids disproportionately, they won't be sent out of the class disproportionately, and they'll be able to stay and learn and be a part of it. But if they're staying and learning and being a part of it, they also need to feel like they're a part of it. And it was just so disheartening to hear some of those stories of, because we want to protect our children, because they're going to feel it when they become an adult. I mean, if you ask any African American adult, we've all felt what they felt. We feel it every day. But we hope and we pray that our children aren't feeling it when they go to school, but we see that they are. So I really do want us to keep trying to find ways to pinpoint those type of stories and try to stop those type of stories from happening, so that and I think automatically these numbers will get better. I really do. I mean, I know there are things that we need to do as far as curriculum is concerned, and we still need to pay attention to that. But if we're paying attention to the actual student and the pain that they're experiencing when they go to school, if we can help fix that, I think we'll see a much smaller gap. Thanks again for your help.
Yeah, thank you. I echo all the other board members' comments about how well this was put together. And this isn't really a question to be answered tonight, but just as we kind of have more conversations about that, I'm always interested to kind of, it's helpful to study the trends and to see kind of where we're going and where our gaps are. But then what do we do with that information, right? So how do we target those students that are not achieving where they should be achieving, and in particular to the kids that may not qualify for intervention services, but they're performing, at a developing or beginning learner or below their grade level. What are we doing for those students that aren't getting services, but they're not performing well either? I feel like that's kind of the gap kids fall down a lot.
Yep.
I already commented. Thank you.
I don't have much to add. I appreciate the report. It made me primarily grateful that we have you, because I find it a little bit overwhelming to try to sort through it. And I had the question that Garrett asked is one that was screaming out to me, which is that I don't really know how to evaluate the significance of even the changes from year to year. I mean, you've got different classes from year to year, so you're not comparing the, and so I don't know if it's because we just had a different cohort, or if it's a significant change in instruction, or what. And so I don't know, anything that we can do moving forward to give us an index or some way to evaluate that, that we can say, we're on track here, we're not on track, this is significant, this is not, would be helpful. But it's quite clear that this is a giant task, so thank you.
And a couple things. One, the slide on the end of grade and end of course unmatched cohorts, part of the reason we put that slide together was to answer that question of at least look at the same group of kids from year to year, because you do have, and ask any teacher, and they'll tell you, you've got good classes come through and you've got rough classes come through, right? There's these cycles that you go through, and that's some of what you see in the data. And so the idea of looking at the unmatched cohorts is at least you're looking at the same group of peers going through time. They're not the exact same kids, but more or less, especially in Decatur, we don't have a huge mobility issue. It's more or less the same kids, so it does help answer that question a little. The other piece, I think, will be really helpful to get to your point of, like, how do you even know if then that's acceptable to get, is it on path to get to the ends or not, will come as we have our ends policies and we start setting what is that exact goal, and we start putting those milestones in place. That's exactly, that will be the purpose of those milestones, to say, all right, if this is our goal 5 years from now, what do we want to see in the results each year moving up to that 5-year increment? I think that'll help a lot. Right. Yep.
Thank you.
I did have a couple more observations.
Should we leave them?
I'll be short on these. Annie's comment made me think about one of the issues. You know, we've said if we do right by the kids, the numbers will take care of themselves. And so it's kind of come up in between the lines in conversations. I don't want us to worry about our public image with regard to these numbers in ways that distract us from doing what's right by the kids. You know, you can look at the kids and you can sort them into buckets, and you can say, these are going to pass. They're going to be proficient or distinguished. And you can look at kids and say, these may pass. And then you can look at some of the kids and you say, they're not going to pass. And if you want to look good, you can focus additional resources on the may pass, and you can ignore the not going to pass. I think we just, you know, that's where I don't want us to worry about our public image. I want us to forget about those numbers.
That was the game that all districts played during the initial years of No Child Left Behind, is they only focused on what everyone called the bubble kids. The kids that you actually thought that if you put some effort, you'd actually get them over that line, and you did it at the expense of the kids who you knew you'd never get across that line because of the metric that was put in place to measure it. So that's a great point.
And the other thing, last thing, promise, is we teach certain things in a different order than the state. So, like, I think physics is one of the things where we may be a little different in doing it at 9th grade. And American literature, I think we do in 10th grade, which other schools do in 11th grade. And so that would be one of those notes that would be nice to have in those things, because whenever we compare our performance to the state, where we do it different, we're probably going to take a hit in that public image arena, and I want to make sure that we're not.
It's a good point.
Although American Lit, we're doing really well.
Well, we're doing really phenomenally. I mean, if we have the choice, one of my children, taking off my board hat or trying to wear both at this moment, is dual enrolled. And we've had the conversation at home as to whether or not he should take dual enrollment English at college. And the answer was hell no. He'll get a better English instruction at the high school, so there's no way. You know, so it's phenomenal, the what's going on in English.
I think those 9th grade lit scores, if I'm not mistaken, 9th grade lit is the one all the students take, correct? And the scores are phenomenal. I was astounded. I knew that they'd be good, but they were phenomenal.
So that's it. Those were all my additional comments.
Any response? Okay.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you.
Let's see. I have to find the agenda.
Naming of facilities.
Naming of facilities.
So Courtney's going to come up and just give us a quick update on the process and where we are in that.
Good evening. You'll remember that Dr. Duty presented at the last board meeting, and I added it in the item what he presented, the process that we were going to use for naming our facilities. So I'm just here to give you a really quick update on where we are. So we started accepting proposals last week for our new school on Talley Street. And as I said, we've just been publicizing it for about a week. We already have about 60 proposals in for the school name. So these, the proposals will be due, the last ones we'll accept is November 9th. That's the last day to accept proposals. After that, Administrative Council, which is cabinet and principals and the superintendent, will take all of those proposals and research them. If there's a name, we need to research the person. We need to research anything that's in the rationale for the proposal. And then we'll take those and we'll narrow them down from there. And if necessary, we'll take the options back out to the community to determine preferences. So our goal is to have options to you by the December board meeting for consideration. And if you'll recall, we'll also have a name option for the central office and for Fifth Avenue. So remember, we'll be naming the central office, the Elizabeth Wilson School Support Center, and then Fifth Avenue will change to Fifth Avenue Upper Elementary School.
Okay, so has that been decided
Yes.
for the naming of this building?
Well,
If it's not the choice for the name for the elementary school, that's what we'll bring forward for the name for this building?
Yes.
Correct.
Sorry, I left that part
No,
out.
no problem.
Yes.
And how what type of communications have you used to get the word out to the community to send in their proposal?
So it's been, we missed the Decatur Focus because that has to be about 2 months before it ever gets published. It's very hard to get things in the Focus unless we do it
Things that
many
are
months
time
up.
sensitive.
Yes,
It's hard to
many
get in.
months in advance. So it's been in every school newsletter. I mean, it's been a week. So far it's been in every school newsletter. It's on every website. It's on social media, and it's been shared numerous times through all of those different things. And it'll be shared every single week until the due date.
Okay.
And we have had November 9th,
So
so a month from today.
Yes. So in a week so far, actually it was less than a week when I checked it, over 60 proposals.
Many of which are the same. I have to give props to the person who recommends Schoolie McSchoolface. That was very nice.
I knew that was going to.
Schoolie McSchoolface. You knew it was going to come up,
Might know
so
that person.
way to go. You know,
That
we'll see.
rationale's
We'll see
pretty
if it
good,
rises
too.
to the top.
Is that a snowplow in England?
Yeah, something like that. So, yeah. But yeah, the response has been tremendous. And the people responding are putting work into their responses and
they are.
being very thoughtful. It's much appreciated.
Yes. Yes. Any
Thank you.
questions? You're welcome.
Okay, action items, board policy manual. So what we have on the policy manual is the culmination of about a year's worth of work and discussion preceding that for a couple of years more. It's not the end goal, but it's, a significant step along the way. And there's a number of things that I want to point out about the manual. First off is that what this is, for the purpose of those, y'all are probably sick of hearing about it, but a large part of it is an effort to revamp our existing policies, which are a mix of board-level policies and executive-level implementation and all kinds of other things. It's a very large manual that hasn't been pared back in many years. It's just sort of grown through accretion for decades, I think. So we're trying to pare this back and to say that these are the policies of the board. This is what the board has directed the superintendent and the goals of the district to be, and within these constraints. And then much of the detail will be left to administrative regulations that the superintendent and his staff will put forward in order to implement our directions. And it's basically consistent, but not exactly consistent with the framework of policy governance. That's sort of the guiding philosophy. In terms of the specifics of this document, I wanted to point out just a couple things. One is that I did send around a red line earlier in the week, which is the changes from our work session. We had a discussion about this from Tuesday. If we need to make further changes, and I expect we do, we just need to bring them forward and make them. This is supposed to be a living document, and we're going to fix it as we go along. The second is that there are a couple of policies that are actually, in addition to kind of the revamp, that are new and different, and I want to call attention to those. One of them is a change to our public comment procedures. That it's some new guidelines about the rules for public comment, basically time restrictions, a restriction about who we're interested in hearing from, that is people associated with the school in one way or another, whether you're a parent, a community member, a business person, but there's got to be a connection to the City Schools of Decatur. We really don't need people coming in from other places just to talk at us. And so I would encourage everybody to read those, and if revisions need to be made, let's talk about them at the next meeting. The other is that there's a change to the non-equity, or pardon me, the non-discrimination statement. And I'm going to find the number. 2.4. So 2.4 is the new code section for our non-discrimination statement. The basic statement is the same. The City Schools of Decatur celebrates diversity and is committed to ensuring that all students have equal opportunities and feel protected, respected, and valued. Discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, color, religion, sex, gender identity, disability, age, marital status, or sexual orientation will not be tolerated. Those are the same categories that we've had in our policy for years. There's an additional paragraph on gender identity that directing the administration to promulgate regulations, which we call gender identity regulations, to ensure that all students are treated in a manner consistent with their gender identity and to ensure that reasonable accommodations are provided to protect the interests of all students. And so that is a new affirmative statement in this policy that will be followed with administrative regulations. I wanted to point that out. The only other thing to point out is that there's still a couple of holes, even in the draft that we've presented, that are noted as holes. We're just going to have to fill those as we get around to them. So that's what we've got. I don't know if we, and so the idea, the suggestion is that today we vote to, table so that we could actually vote to approve and adopt these policies at the next meeting.
I'll just share, because I know Lewis won't say it for himself. This is here tonight thanks to Lewis's work, because we have struggled for a long time to get all of our ideas together and to gather it all together. And Lewis volunteered to step up and pull all those different ideas together in one coherent place and did an amazing job, to the point that I think right off the bat, he shared a first draft with us, and we all said, yeah, that looks pretty darn good. So thank you so much for that, Lewis. That was instrumental in getting us to this point.
I echo that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois.
I think you found your next column.
Yeah, I don't think so. You should be an attorney. Oh.
You should present at the NSBA on this.
Yes, that's right. I appreciate that.
I do have some comments for us to consider, possibly park until after this is passed, but things to come back and potentially revisit. In one of the earlier attempts at this, we had some language in there that specifically said that this supersedes anything else that's sitting out there.
I
don't know
think
if
we would
need
do
to
that
have
in the motion if we go to adopt it, but we also could do it as a statement in the manual as well.
I think if it's not stated, I think it is, but if it's not, I think it probably should be.
It may have been, but I tried to find it.
I
and
know what you're
couldn't.
talking about. There was a statement like that at one point.
Point taken.
We'll track it down.
The next one is, at some point, this is a park and fix as we go, how we integrate this with those national board codes so that other entities that either want to audit us or, when the state tells us we have to have a policy for blank, that we have like an IHF graduation requirements policy, that type of thing. And the last one is even further down the road. I hope that we will revisit policy IHF graduation requirements, because 2/3 of it applies to students who are no longer in our school systems. It was last modified in 2010 to apply to students entering the school system after like 2009, which is all of our students.
Okay.
So,
which policy was that again?
IHF. It has 3 sets of graduation requirements based upon when you entered high school, and 2/3 of them can go away.
One other hole, I know that, for instance, the superintendent's budget authority is not in here. And so
Oh.
currently, we've delegated authority up to $50,000, and anything over that has to come to us. That needs to be in here, it's not.
Okay.
It just got missed.
And as we go through and figure out, because what the things that aren't in here we'll probably need to make as administrative regulations, either because they're specifically called for in here or because we need them.
Right.
As we see things like that too, we can bring those to your attention as well.
There's a whole bunch of things that are required that aren't called out.
Yeah.
So,
Well, congratulations on getting us here.
Yes.
Thanks.
so do we have a motion to table it? I always think that's fine.
Move to table until the next regularly scheduled board meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So the motion carries. Okay. Let's see here.
Work session.
Work session. Oh, board work session.
So we need to talk about what we want to do for our next work session. I spoke with some of you about some of the things we weren't able to get to in the last work session, which we had intended to. It was very helpful. We sat down at the last meeting, remember, at this point, and we talked through what exactly do we want to cover. And we came up with a list of like 10 points, and I think we got to maybe one or maybe two of them in that work session, and there were a bunch more we really wanted to talk about. So one of the ideas I floated is that maybe we want to schedule a part 2 for that, and where we can get into some more details about restorative practices and some of the other related things. And I would recommend if we go that route, we either schedule that for November or December, because we do have that training you heard about in the work session coming up in November, I think maybe 6th and 7th or something like that. So we may want to be strategic in how we schedule that work session to make sure it's as helpful as possible. But there are some things on that list still, and I can pull it up if you want, that we wanted to talk about. So that was one of the items. Another item we've talked about quite a bit is the employee grievance process and having a work session on that. And so those are the two big ones that we've talked about recently, and there may be others that we want to bring to the forefront as well for this next meeting.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm anxious to have the grievance policy one, and I think it's helpful too if the board can kind of give you as much direction as possible about kind of what we're hoping to achieve with that in advance.
That would be very helpful.
I have a thought, but you might have one.
Go ahead.
You look poised and ready.
I'm just listening.
About the restorative justice, one of the things that we've already discussed, but is that I had in my mind sort of conflated the topic of restorative justice with disproportionality and discipline. And the work session was focused on the concept of restorative justice, kind of like with the capital R and a capital J, as a concept and a program, which is one piece of the disproportionality, but not the whole piece. I still have a strong interest in exploring the rest of it, I don't have an interest in exploring restorative justice at this time, prior to there being more of a plan in place and prior to the staff training and basically for y'all having a direction, which is fine. But we certainly shouldn't be waiting until the restorative justice training has occurred before we are taking a deep dive, a hard look at the discipline issues right now. And there's two steps to the process. The first is trying to understand the problem, and the second is trying to get hold of the solution, which might be restorative justice. I still think there's a lot of work to be done to understand the problem.
Sure.
And we've had people in private conversations, not thankfully in public comment, have talked about individuals with whom some people believe there's a problem, have talked about specific schools that have a higher than normal out-of-school suspension rate, et cetera. And since I've said that, I'll go ahead and give the punchline, which is it turns out that there's we're talking about 1 year's worth of data where there was one child.
Yeah, what you're referring to is what we'd heard from folks about 100% of kids at a given school that were out of school suspended were black. And that was true. There was one child, and the child happened to be black. So that is we do need to make sure we're presenting good data to people so that they actually know the facts of the situation.
And so without, going now, I would like to, I feel like it's kind of front burner issue. We need to go ahead and dig into it. We need to be able to respond to folks who are asking us questions.
Like
We need to
dig
get
into
smart.
the data.
We need to dig into the data. These are the individual instances, who's getting out of school suspension, et cetera. And for me, that's the work session that I feel like we ought to be ready to do that. This at the coming up work session. We might have to go into an executive session. We could probably do that on the fly.
Some specifics.
As needed to discuss specifics, but that's what I'd have an interest in doing.
Okay. We could do that for the next one, if that's something that the board desires.
Because I do think it did, the last one just kind of left that piece off, so I don't want to maybe just keep popping back and forth from different topics, since this is in the forefront, like Louis said. It's almost like a part 2 of what we had last time, so I would like to continue in that vein if possible.
Okay. So you're interested in things like what do we see for referrals, the types of discipline, what are the consequences of the infractions, things broken down by race, what patterns do we see? Do we see patterns at the school level, things like that? What other kind of data are you interested in seeing?
Well, that round table that you talked about, that once a week go
Correct.
over the, everything that you saw the week before.
Yep.
Just some of the findings that you're seeing with that.
Okay.
Concerns and good things you're finding, and then maybe things that you're also seeing of concern.
Okay.
Could you also cover some of the data quality and data reporting issues, some of the sticky wicket type of stuff?
Yes.
Where we can trust numbers and where we need to read into them.
Yep.
It would also be useful to understand kind of the the legal fence. I know like for weapons and stuff, there are different federal definitions of words that make it impossible for you to write a policy that complies with both the federal and the state definitions, or at least very difficult. But where is something the law, and where do we have, the state rules and guidance, and what have we opted? So kind of where are those borders so that we know, where we have latitude to act?
Did you, in the work session, did you get into it all, the law that was passed about out of school suspension last year?
The 3 biggies, we kept calling them.
Yeah, the 3 biggies.
Yeah.
So we can do an update on that too. We're hoping that soon we will get an update from the Department of Education on the actual rules. Because once the law gets passed, then they write the rules. So if we have that in time, we can discuss that as well.
Another thing I'm interested in, which is throughout, and so I don't know like how this informs the presentation, but be thinking about it, is that throughout with all of the equity work, it seems to me that there's a component which is changing people's biases and working with people so that they understand and are aware of their biases, and they can kind of govern them, right? And so that's a very big part of the problem. It's a big part of our solution to it. I think there's another part of the problem, which is systemic, which it's not about the individuals who are making choices. It's about the framework within which they're made. That is the rules that we're passing.
Like, what are the options available to a person who is assigning consequence, for instance?
Exactly.
That if you only have certain options, you are
Exactly.
you are framing what's going to happen to that child.
And I keep harping on the discretion point that, we have a tendency to think, well, we've got plenty of discretion, for instance, to take a restorative approach or a punitive approach. Because the discretion is there, we don't need to fix that. Well, it turns out that the existence of the discretion is part of the problem. It's an example of something where we might actually need to be changing the rules.
Yep.
And not just trying to work on people's, that very long term. There's actually, and can actually be shorter term work. We can make quicker progress on some of these things by changing those rules that need to be changed. And so I'd like to give, in everything that we do, I'd like to, kind of like we're going to isolate race. I think we also need to isolate, what is it that where can we change rules to actually change something today to start the solution?
Got it.
I guess the response I have to that is to also balance, the tighter the rules get, the closer you get to zero discretion and a zero tolerance type of policy. The further you go in the opposite direction, the more subjective the whole thing is, and the more easy there is for those biases to play themselves out in the shadows.
No, I'll give
how
you.
to balance
I'll
those.
give you a perfect example because I've had the conversation with half a dozen parents over accelerated math and our process for choosing for accelerated math. And all the parents I spoke to, they knew that the teacher had a high opinion of their child and thought their child should be accelerated. And so they said, why do you even look at the test score? If the teacher says the child should be accelerated, they should be accelerated. And my response to all of them was, I agree that that's an important aspect, and that's why it's part of the criteria is the teacher input. But you would feel very differently if the teacher input was that your child should not be accelerated, and if we only relied on that as the latitude. And that's why we have some parameters within which we make the decision. But there's a range within which that decision is made, right? And I think that's the point Lewis is getting to as well, is that if you don't ever foresee out-of-school suspension being a reasonable outcome of a given offense, then take it off the table. Don't even have the discretion to give that as a possible consequence, but leaving appropriate discretion for whatever the range of those offenses are. So.
I agree. And another example is the one we talked about at the work session, which is that I can't remember the example, but that the way that our discipline code is written just says for this offense you can have anything from, nothing to being
from a detention to an out-of-school suspension,
And so instead, the example was having an explicit progression: first offense, second offense, third offense, so that we know how these things are going to be exercised. You get the point. I just would like to
No
think
problem.
about it as we present. I have another suggestion, but not about the content, but I'll stop.
I just had maybe this is incorporated into some of the outcome of some of these suggestions, but just to I would like to have a better understanding of what is the information, what is the data that we are collecting, and what part of that is required versus what part of that are we doing because we want to.
Gotcha.
And then what do we see? What are our known gaps in terms of gathering information about how we are disciplining our students? And then I just wonder if that information is mapped to our rules so that we could see this, this rule here had the highest number of violations, and maybe take a harder look at that particular rule and how that's being applied, and see if that's maybe one we need to work on first, and help kind of prioritize where we are coming up with these alternatives or discretion or non-discretion.
All of this we can tie back to the rules. All of the discipline incidents go back to a rule violation.
Okay, so that would be interesting for me to see because I've never seen that. Okay.
As we go down this path, I think without this getting undue weight, I think we need to be mindful of how we're listening to our teachers and our administrators as we move, what feedback we get from them and listen to, so that that they feel that this is not disrespectful of their professional.
No, I think it's crucial to
expertise.
have some folks there to speak to that have that voice in the meeting as well, just so we can be hearing. I would like to have it happen in the moment, hearing from folks who may have a different perspective because they're the ones that are having those interactions every day. So.
Mm-hmm. And then just this is just an overarching thought, but as well as having teacher input, having student input.
Yep.
And just that as a sounding board.
So my other thought is not about the subject matter, but about our process for these work sessions. And the way this has worked in the past, just so that you guys know, is that we name a subject and we provide essentially no guidance, and then expect that you're going to come to us with a presentation that meets our expectations. which we failed to share.
And then tell us everything we did wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I recognize and I've appreciated the information that we're getting, but in fact, we have not communicated, because in large part, we don't know until we're in the work session. But I think to be more productive, we should work a bit harder on the front end. We're doing that now, so the whole point of this discussion is to do that. But I think that what I would suggest is that we, and I know that you will do this, and maybe this is a note to me or to us, that we need to take, when you send out your meeting notes, let's actually take a look at these meeting notes and make a firm commitment that by next Tuesday, we're going to have a plan for the work session. We're going to understand sort of the, the run of show, and that we're going to agree that this is what we're looking for. We've got the subject matters covered. We've got the right balance between presentation and discussion, et cetera.
Great.
And so if you send it, because I know that you'll take these good notes and send them out, but let's us make a commitment to actually take a look and provide feedback and make sure that we're happy with it.
Great.
Do you think I think the balance between presentation and discussion is a good one. Do we want to give some guidance on that, like hour of presentation, hour of discussion? Is that what?
That was the guidance last time, I
Okay,
think.
that was, okay.
I think
We may
that's
want to
what we
go a
shot
little
for, but-
deeper in, kind of establishing the questions that we want to explore and having some type of guidance as to when we're going to say, we're done, when you're going to move on to the next one.
Right.
Or how, maybe even setting some clear expectations that when you've covered this, you've gone to enough depth that we can, ask
Well, and
if we've
we'll
arrived.
sit down and give some thought to when we put our heads together after these meetings and discuss what we all heard, said. We can kind of come up with a plan that I can share. That's what I can share out with you, so we can see if we collectively heard what you were saying or if we missed the mark on something. But it may be, depending on the work session too, it may be best to say, hey, we're going to do a little of this and then let's discuss. Then we're going to do a little of this and let's discuss. And so it may depend on the topic, what the best approach is to.
For my 2 cents, I would much prefer to have, an hour of presentation. I don't care what it is. I'm going to get bored. And so if it's broken up so that there's some information and then discussion, it's just going to work better.
I agree.
I think we'll all be more engaged.
And then you guys just have to promise not to get into the next topic while you're doing that discussion.
I can't
Good
make
luck.
any promises.
Or at least allow me to call you on it when you do it.
We can agree to that.
Yeah.
So are we saying December for the follow-up on the restorative? And
So,
The training.
grievance next? No,
restorative-
not grievance, discipline next.
so discipline in October.
Okay.
And then I think we probably will do grievance and then more information on restorative practices following the training and
That gets us to the end of the year.
like a tentative plan.
Yes. Can I add one item to the thing on the discipline, which is the request that the parents have made, that there be a grievance is what triggered this, that they have a grievance procedure to make anonymous.
Yep, so that's one of the things we talked about when we met with the Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights, was that we are investigating ways to make that happen in a way that there are tools available that we're kind of leaning towards, because one of the problems is if there's no way to have two-way communication, it sometimes can be very difficult to follow up on an anonymous complaint.
Right.
And so there are tools out there that are designed exactly for that, to allow someone to, if they want to submit anonymously, they can. The system, wherever that's housed, knows who they are, how to get in touch with them, but we don't. So we write back to them through the system and say, hey, I need these 3 pieces of information so I can follow up. They respond to us and can give that information, and we never know who that person is. And so it's I've seen a couple of those out there. We're investigating those now, and that was part of our commitment leaving the meeting with that group last week, so.
I guess this may or may not need to be discussed at the work session. Sounds like you might not be ready.
We won't be ready by the work session.
That's fine.
Yep.
Okay, are we ready to move on? The next item is the board work plan.
Property Tax Study Committee.
I was wondering. Property Tax Study Committee, Garrett and Heather.
Well, we're in the process of working on a draft of the RFP.
It might be good to say we're ready for you all to be in the process
Yeah.
of working on the draft of the RFP.
Yeah.
Because both Heather and I have taken a stab at some wording and looking at what else is out there, and we really need you all to kind of weigh in and help polish it.
I wanted to ask, would it be helpful, I was reading through it today, I think it may be helpful before others really dig into it for me to go through and just accept almost all of those changes, just so then it's a more readable document.
Sure.
As others dig in. Is that okay with you too? That
Yeah.
it looked like it was ready for that? Okay.
So I don't know if I made a comment. I don't know if I was commenting on the right draft.
Yeah, I
now
think
what
that
you're
you were, and I liked your comment. And I actually, before David goes and accepts all the comments, I was going to go in and mentioned it to Garrett briefly before, as we were walking in, but I'll incorporate your comment in a way that I think you intended, and then we can go from there. So
Great.
if I
It
can
would
do
be-
that tomorrow, so I'll
Great.
email you when I'm done.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks.
It would be great if this could be on the agenda next month. Because I really don't want us to end up hitting the summer and not having
No.
kind of, gotten to the next stride.
Well, I'll attach it to the agenda next month.
Okay,
We
And if
can
you
have,
all aren't ready, it's coming anyway.
okay.
we can have sympathy next time something's not moving as fast on
That's
the
right. Exactly.
administration.
That was our ulterior motive in this whole thing.
Thank you all for doing that.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we up to future dates, board work plan. I kind of feel like we had this discussion just a minute ago.
Yeah, the only future date I want to make sure that we call out is the, at the very bottom, the National School Board Association Conference is in Philadelphia this year, March 30th to April 1st. And I think the last time we talked, there had been a practice of attending when it was on this side of the country. So just want to make sure you're aware of that, because this is one of those years where it does come back, so.
When do we need to let
Ashaki, do you remember any deadlines for registering or anything?
I think the early bird started like October 11th.
We'll
something like
find
that.
and if there is like an early bird
Unless,
date
like,
that we can
ends.
still meet, we'll get it to you and let you know, but.
I'd just like to say that the NSBA conference, I get a lot out of. I don't get a lot out of many conferences. I get a lot out of that conference. And I would be particularly interested to visit some of the, as I shared with David, some of the work that Canada's doing in equity. Because they are one of the world leaders in not having that measurable difference in anticipated outcomes based upon the socioeconomic part of the equation.
And I do think the school district is just gonna buy a house in Philadelphia, because the Courageous Conversations Conference is there this year, the EL National Conference is there this year, the National School Board Association Conference is there this year.
Don't joke about that.
So-
Somebody will report it.
Yeah, that's good.
Doing
So we will get details out then, so that, I agree that it's a great conference, and we may want to just try as best we can to go as a board as a possibility, but we'll get all those details out to everybody.
Great. We do have a need for an executive session to discuss legal and personnel issues. I don't know if we
No
anticipate a vote.
action.
No action.
I
will
don't
be taken.
anticipate any vote after.
So do we have a motion to go into executive session?
So moved?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carries. So we'll now enter executive session. Thank you all.
Thank you.